Specific means that we are communicating no more and no less information than is needed or required. Specificity means we are giving enough information. We're giving the information that is relevant while avoiding generalizations and euphemisms. If demographic details are relevant, you'll want to share the most specific criteria that is accurate. When you're talking about groups of people, use the most specific term that is accurate for that whole group. For example, if you're talking about just a group of people who are all from Germany, you would refer to them as Germans rather than just Europeans. If they all happen to belong to a bird watching club, and that is a relevant detail for whatever topic you're discussing, then saying they are German bird watchers will be the most specific and accurate descriptor for this group. If you're talking about a group of students from Japan, it would not be accurate to call them Asian students. Always use the most specific terminology for a group, but only when the demographic information is relevant for the conversation. Let's say you are a journalist and you interviewed one specific Japanese student about their school lunch program, and that student shared with you that they are autistic. Since that student being autistic isn't relevant to their school lunch program, that demographic detail doesn't need to be included when referring to them. Including that they identify as autistic could add unnecessary bias or confusion to what you're communicating. The term Oriental is not an acceptable term for people, but even for goods, it fails the specificity test. The term comes from Latin, meaning from the East, which begs a question, east of what? Rather than using a vague term that centers Europe as the norm and exoticizes anything east of Europe, learn as much as you can about the region or culture that created a particular item. The word Oriental has connotations of exoticism, whether it's being used for people or for goods. Let's let the word Oriental go and instead use a more specific and accurate descriptor. I frequently see broad euphemisms being used to describe groups, such as disadvantaged populations or at risk youth. A euphemism is a word that is an indirect term used in place of a word that can feel too blunt or direct. If we're talking about disadvantaged populations or at risk youth, who disadvantaged them? What are they at risk of? Using euphemisms in these situations is a disservice to the people we are speaking about. Not only are these terms deficit-based labels, but they may give the impression that this person's situation is permanent and can't be changed. It doesn't assign any responsibility to why they are disadvantaged. If a young person is given the label of being at risk, they may be less likely to be trusted or provided with opportunities. Imagine how someone might describe themselves. Does anyone say, I'm marginalized or I'm at risk? They would more likely clearly explain their situation without using euphemisms. There may not be a single word solution which accurately describes a person or a group's situation. You may have to do some work to learn more about the people you're referring to so that you can accurately and specifically describe who they are. If you hear a euphemism like at risk or marginalized, I encourage you to ask the speaker more questions. This is an opportunity for rich conversation. If I were to describe a group of young people as having limited access to healthcare, education, and basic necessities, this would provide you with more context on what sorts of challenges they are facing, which are not due to their own shortcomings or lack of character, but instead are the result of a failed healthcare system, inequitable education system, and an inadequate safety net for families without the financial resources to meet their basic needs. That's the sort of specificity we need if we're going to not just communicate effectively, but have the vocabulary to clearly describe, assess, and solve problems. Let's say you work in a grade school and you have received funding to create an after-school program, but you are limited in the number of students you can include in your program. You want to give priority to kids who can get the most benefit from joining, maybe kids who don't already have access to after-school enrichment programs. At the same time, you want to communicate this specific requirement without being disrespectful. How can you advertise your school program in a way that effectively communicates who should join? You can likely guess at a few words we're going to avoid. We obviously want to skip the one word labels like poor or marginalized. Not only are those terms demeaning and deficit based, they aren't well defined. We know we'll need to use multiple words to get clear on our desired participants, and rather than describing deficit, let's use asset based language. That means we're going to talk about opportunity instead of lack. Pause here and think about what language you might choose. Here's what I might do. We're excited to offer a limited enrollment after school program focused on creativity, connection, and exploration. This program is specifically designed for students who may benefit from structured after school time. The language is somewhat broad and vague without being demeaning. Since this flyer will likely go out to parents, we'll want to make sure it is translated into the languages used by family members of the students at this school. Using specific language and clearly defining the issues at hand gets us one step closer to communicating inclusively.